The sun was barely rising over the Coronado coastline when the waves crashed against the cold sand, carrying with them the scent of salt, steel, and discipline. It was the kind of morning where most people were still asleep, but for the Navy SEAL candidates gathered along the beach, it was another day of proving whether they belonged among the toughest warriors on Earth. The instructors stood with arms folded, their silhouettes sharp against the pale light, barking commands that blended with the ocean. Everyone expected the day to be brutal, and everyone knew someone would quit. But no one expected the twist that would arrive with the footsteps of a woman walking confidently toward the training zone, carrying nothing but a duffel bag and a calmness that contrasted the tension in the air. Her name was Captain Elena Ross, a special operations officer who had earned respect across multiple branches, though very few truly knew her. Today she wasn't here to take over training, give a speech, or conduct an inspection. She was here for something different, something that would test her as much as it would silence doubts. The SEALs saw her approaching and exchanged smirks. One of the instructors, a broad-shouldered veteran with years of experience in shaping warriors, stepped forward with a skeptical grin. "Ma'am," he said with a respectful but amused tone, "this isn't exactly a spectator event." Elena dropped her duffel on the ground, wiped a grain of sand from her cheek, and simply replied, "Mind if I give it a try?" The beach went silent for a second before nearly everyone burst into laughter. SEAL candidates, tired and aching, still found energy to chuckle. Even the instructors laughed, not disrespectfully, but in disbelief. They weren't mocking her because she was a woman. They were laughing because she had arrived in the middle of Hell Week's most notorious physical challenge, the record-breaking log carry. This challenge had humbled some of the toughest men alive. Even elite athletes had been crushed by its weight. And here she was asking casually as if she were volunteering for a warm-up exercise. The instructor tried to hide his amusement. "You sure about that, Captain?" he asked. She nodded once, her eyes unwavering. "I'll run with whichever team is struggling the most." Now the laughs grew louder. Every team looked like they were struggling. Exhaustion clung to them like the wet sand on their boots. But there was one group, Team Echo, that had been falling behind for hours. Their movements were sloppy, their steps uneven, and one of their candidates was close to collapsing. The instructors pointed toward them, half-jokingly, but Elena simply tightened her gloves, walked toward the massive wooden log, and positioned herself under it. The men around her exchanged looks of disbelief. The candidate beside her whispered, "Ma'am, this thing weighs nearly 300 pounds. She gave him a quick smile. "So do expectations. Let's lift." With a synchronized heave, the team raised the log onto their shoulders. The candidates were shocked to feel the weight shift as Elena took on more than her share. She didn't grunt or strain. She simply planted her feet in the sand and pressed forward. The instructors watched, their earlier amusement fading into focused silence. As the run began, something changed. The struggling team found its rhythm again. Where there had been hesitation, there was now determination. Where there had been faltering steps, there was a driving force that came from Elena's unshaking pace. She didn't run ahead of them. She ran with them, step for step, breath for breath, carrying the crushing weight like someone who had trained her entire life for this exact moment. The SEAL candidates from other teams watched as disbelief turned into respect. Miles passed, sweat poured, shoulders ached, but Elena's presence kept Team Echo moving. One of the candidates couldn't help but ask between gasping breaths, "Ma'am, how are you doing this?" Elena kept her eyes ahead, answering with a steady voice, "Pain is temporary. Regret isn't. Keep moving." The instructors followed nearby, and the veteran leading the exercise began checking his stopwatch more and more frequently. Something wasn't normal about their pace. They weren't just doing well, they were accelerating. The team that had been last place all morning was now pushing toward the front. Candidates who had been on the brink of quitting felt a surge of energy simply by matching Elena's rhythm. It wasn't that she made the log lighter, she made the purpose heavier. She made them remember why they were there. The run continued across the shoreline, through soft sand that swallowed boots, through cold ocean water that numbed legs, through wind that slapped faces raw. Elena never slowed. When another candidate stumbled, she shifted the log's weight toward herself without the slightest complaint. When one's breath turned shaky, she gave short, tactical instructions. Heel to toe. Control your breathing. Don't fight the sand. Use it. By the time they reached the halfway point, the laughter from earlier was long gone. The instructors watched with folded arms, their faces unreadable, but inside they all understood what was happening. They weren't witnessing someone trying a challenge. They were witnessing someone redefining it. When Team Echo reached the final stretch, the other teams cheered for them, a rare sight in a competition that usually bred silence between groups. But this wasn't about competition anymore, it was about witnessing a moment that no one there would forget. The veteran instructor checked his stopwatch again, and his eyes widened. "No way," he whispered. But yes, Team Echo, led by Captain Elena Ross, was about to break the standing record. The log hit the finish point with a heavy thud. The candidates collapsed to the sand, panting and coughing. Elena lowered the log gently, straightened up despite her shaking arms, and wiped the sweat from her forehead. The instructor walked toward her with a stunned expression. "Captain, you just crushed the record." The SEALs who had laughed earlier stared in admiration, some shaking their heads, some still catching their breath. One muttered to another, "I thought she was joking." Another replied, "She just carried half that log by herself." The instructor turned to the entire group. "I hope you all paid attention," he said, pointing to Elena. "That is what mental toughness looks like." Elena didn't brag, didn't smirk, didn't say a word about proving anyone wrong. Instead, she looked at Team Echo and said, "You did it. You all did it. Remember this moment when you start doubting yourselves again." The words hit deeper than any speech an instructor could give. Those candidates would carry that memory through every mission of their careers. After the event ended, a few SEALs approached her with genuine curiosity. "Ma'am," one said, "where'd you learn to handle that kind of pain?" Elena picked up her duffel, slinging it over her shoulder as casually as if she'd just finished a morning jog. "You don't learn it," she said softly. "You choose it, every day." Before walking away, she turned back and added, "And sometimes you choose it so others remember that they can choose it too." The ocean waves rolled behind her as she walked off the training ground, leaving behind silence, a rare silence filled not with doubt but with profound respect. Even the instructors, hardened and unshakable, found themselves nodding at one another. They had witnessed something that didn't happen often. Leadership wasn't always about shouting the loudest or being the toughest. Sometimes leadership was stepping into the arena, sharing the burden, and proving that strength isn't defined by gender, rank, or reputation. It's defined by resilience. Word about the event spread quickly across the base, turning into an unintentional legend. Some exaggerated the details, some softened them, but everyone agreed on one thing. The moment she said, "Mind if I give it a try?" and then shattered a Navy SEAL record, she changed the atmosphere of that training ground forever. Days later, some of the candidates who had witnessed the moment found themselves pushing harder in their tasks. Whenever they approached physical or mental limits, they remembered her steady breathing, her calm voice, her unbreakable pace. They remembered how someone who didn't need to prove anything came and proved everything. It wasn't about breaking a record. It was about breaking doubt. And as you, the viewer, continue exploring stories of courage, grit, and true warrior spirit, make sure you don't miss any future tales like this. Subscribe to Bravo Warrior Stories so you never miss the next moment of extraordinary bravery and relentless determination. Because somewhere out there, another warrior is about to say the same unforgettable words, "Mind if I give it a try?"